Now that the budget talks about privatization, what does it really mean in the Indian context? Raghuram Rajan, in many senses, privatization is a hugely important aspect of this budget because the budget says 1.75 lakh crores in revenues will come from privatization, and we really need that because of the state our economy is in. So it's got to be done this year. But are you now concerned about implementation? There have been huge privatization or disinvestment targets in each of the last few budgets, and we've never come even close to meeting those targets. Not even last year when share prices actually shot up and we could have got a good price for selling public sector units and a good time to privatize, but nothing.
Well, as I understand it, LIC is not included in that 1.75 crores. Now, LIC is not going to be sold off, converted into a private corporation. We'll probably sell off a few shares, etc. So that, to my mind, is not privatization. It's sort of raising money through selling some shares. Doesn't change the fundamental character. Let's put that on the side. I think the talk about privatization is actually selling some assets into the private sector. And the ones that have raised a lot of hope in the markets is two public sector banks and one of the general insurance companies. Now, the reality is, if you ask who's there to buy, clearly for the banks, I think it would be a grave mistake to sell it to an industrialist. We've had some rumors of that from the RBI, some reports coming out that is a possibility, and I hope that doesn't become a reality, because we really don't have the supervisory structures to contain the kind of possible malfeasance when somebody can lend to their own entities. So I would say let's take that off the table.
That's really important to hear from you, because privatizing two banks has been a major headline in this budget. So how, as you say, how it's implemented is crucial, right?
If you take that off the table, that leaves some private banks that can buy the public sector banks. The question is, how comfortable do you feel creating a mega private bank at this point? Because the ones that would be able would be HDFC and perhaps ICICI, maybe Axis Bank. But this would create a huge entity. And are you comfortable with that on a too big to fail basis? Something which is second in size to this State Bank of India. The other possibility is a foreign bank, which Swaminathan Iyer has suggested. That, to my mind, would be hugely politically difficult to do. Selling one of our private sector banks at this point directly, one of the large private sector banks.
With your practical experience and your perspective, what are the key steps you would suggest in the implementation of bank privatization? What are the options?
Large ones to a foreign bank would be very difficult, which then leaves the route that many of us have been suggesting. You need to improve the governance of these public sector banks, bring in more professionals, give the board more authority to hire and fire the CEO, and then take away government control. In a sense, make these public corporations working in the public interest, but owned by the public rather than by the government. That is possible, but that takes time. So I am not sure when you announce, a 1-year window to do this, whether in fact it means we start the process of making these ready for privatization, or do we end it? Unfortunately, the history of our record of privatization is really dismal, right? We said 2 lakh crores. In fact, last year, we did something like 30,000 crores. So if we go by the record, we're not going to achieve this. Now, hopefully what this implies is a fresh urgency. And Naushad Forbes suggested, for example, taking the firms out of the ministry that controls them, because the ministry that controls them doesn't want to sell those. Take it out into a privatization ministry, have somebody like Arun Shourie in the previous NDA government who actually will bulldoze his way. Unfortunately, at this point, we have yet to await details.
Abhijit Banerjee, one of the concerns that you've often raised and I wanted to ask you if it applies to our economic policy today as well, and that is that money that banks are slated to disburse in reality is not actually dispersed, at least not in a fair and equal manner.
My sense of a lot of that credit, this one subject I worked on many years ago, is that banks tend to sit on that money because they feel like collecting that money will be too much of a pain, so they sit on it. And especially they don't give it to the poorest people, the people in the unorganized sector don't get it, etc. So the intention is not enough. If he really wants to do it, the government needs to be a cracker whip over the lenders and make them find the right borrowers and give it to them. And when it does it, it actually works. There is evidence showing that, for example, the priority sector lending. There's we did a study a long time ago. There's a recent study also published in a top journal from India showing that the priority sector regulation had big effects on production of those sectors. So when you do it, it works, but it really needs to be fully pushed through.